I'm not getting sound.
I would like to welcome everyone from around the world today to today's Legacy Justice webinar. As you saw, we had a little technical difficulty with our opening video, and that's kind of our plan. Is we run that early, so if we're going to have an issue, we have it resolved before you all join us. As you can see, there's a crowd behind me, which is unusual. I'm joining the Montana State Ancient Order Hibernians for their state convention, and they wanted to begin. It's 9 a.m. here in Montana, 4 p.m. in Ireland, and they wanted to begin with being part of this Legacy Justice webinar. Our audience today, as I said, comes from around the United States, Canada. We have the Canadian AOH president, Victor Boyle, on with us today. And his whole team is joining us. We have folks in the Republic of Ireland, the UK, and most importantly, our friends from the North Ireland. The Legacy Justice Bill was proposed by Boris Johnson's government and has continued through a revolving door leadership, and is now part of Prime Minister Sunak's legacy. From Johnson to Sunak, they have accomplished something vital to success in the North Ireland. They have united all major political parties in the North Ireland in a common cause: opposition to the Northern Ireland Legacy Bill that violates both the domestic and international law. Because this bill violates the human rights of so many, it is opposed by everyone, really everyone we've dealt with, except for the UK government. We know that 9 out of 10 citizens in the United Kingdom oppose the amnesty provisions. That kind of says it all. The U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, the executive branch all oppose the bill. The United Kingdom, as part of our special relationship, has united both the Democratic and Republican leadership in the United States in opposition to this UK human rights violation. We could go on for hours listing those in opposition to this bill, but it is critical that we move forward and hear from our guests who are joining us now in the push for this bill to be taken to the European Court of Human Rights. I'll now turn it over to Martin Galvin, the Freedom for Ireland Chair for the Ancient Order Hibernians in America. Martin?
Roger, thank you, Danny. 2 years, well, in May of 2 years ago, May of 2021, the Ballymurphy families went into court, heard an inquest verdict that said that 10 people, including a Catholic priest, a grandmother, 8 others, who had been branded as killers or branded as people who were death was justified by the British government, they were vindicated. They were found to have been totally innocent. On that same day, the British proposed in a Queen's speech that they would be moving forward with a bill that would change that, stop families from coming forward, and totally reject the Stormont House Agreement, which they had made with the Irish government in December of 2014. That bill finally passed last week. We today, America, as the Irish Echo said, says no. We today are going to talk about how that bill can be opposed. What is the next thing we can do? We're going to begin with a Congressman, Mike Lawler. We're going to talk to a former Taoiseach who was one of the people who was an architect of the Good Friday Agreement. We're going to talk to victim to talk about what this impact of this bill will be on her family, a civil rights lawyer, and then we're going to get the view from the New York Consul General on the view of the Irish government. So we're going to begin first with Congressman Mike Lawler. Well, he's in Rockland, Westchester, I think parts of Dutchess and Putnam. I hope I didn't leave anything out. Congressman Lawler had made a strong statement on September 7th, opposing the bill, criticizing it. But before that, he's been part of a number of initiatives in which congressmen have co-signed letters of congressional initiatives opposing the bill. And most recently, he was part of a CODEL involving congressmen and senators who visited Ireland, visited the north of Ireland, and had the opportunity to take this opposition directly to British officials. Congressman Lawler Thank you for being with us. You played an important role in Congress so far. Why is it that you and so many congressmen are opposed to this bill?
Well, thanks for having me, Martin and Danny. It's great to be with all of you, especially as a member of the Ancient Order of the Hibernians, Rockland County Division 3, one of the largest AOH divisions in the country, representing Pearl River. It's where I live. Many of you, I'm sure, familiar with it. But I think it is important, obviously, as Congress, given the role that the United States government has played over the years when it comes to the Good Friday agreements and maintaining peace and stability in the north of Ireland, that we continue to have a voice in this process, and that we continue to push back where appropriate and speak out. And so, I co-signed onto a letter opposing the legacy bill and frankly the intent of it, broadly speaking, to give amnesty and make it more difficult for families and victims to get justice. And I think as the Good Friday agreements and the agreement as established in 2014, it's important that we continue to ensure that victims ultimately are getting justice, that the truth is getting out as to what happened and who did what all these years ago, and obviously that we continue to have a good faith relationship between the Irish government, the UK government, and the north of Ireland. And I think obviously there's a number of challenges going on right now in addition to the legacy bill, not the least of which is that you don't have a functioning government in the north of Ireland. And so I've put forth a resolution that would seek to bring all parties back to the table and call on the UK government to, frankly, force the DUP back to the table and ensure that we have a functioning government with our minister and our deputy minister. And so, just about 2 months ago, Michelle O'Neill, the first minister elect, came to the United States, and I was honored to welcome her. Danny joined us and have her meet with a number of my colleagues, including the speaker, on the same day that the UK Prime Minister was here. And so it was a good opportunity to discuss many of these issues that, with respect to the legacy bill, as well as obviously making sure that we have a functioning government in Northern Ireland.
Congressman, in your statement last week, you said that this bill will only reopen old wounds, violate fundamental principles of human rights and justice, and it fuels further division. You were just in Ireland. You were part of the congressional delegation. Did you have an opportunity to bring those sentiments, those criticisms directly to high-ranking British officials about the bill?
Yeah, so it was my first trip to Ireland. So it was a great opportunity, and it was great to see Helena there and, meet with our Deputy Prime Minister. But also to have a real dialogue on these issues with both Irish officials as well as UK officials. And when we were in London prior to our visit to Dublin, we did meet with Lord Kane and had a pretty extensive conversation with Lord Kane on the issue of the legacy bill and how he saw it going forward. And frankly, as we saw in the last, week and a half, it played out as he explained it would to us, that, the House of Lords would potentially reject the bill, and amend it again and send it back to the House of Commons. The House of Commons would immediately, pass the bill as they have. And then they'd be in the same predicament. And I think he was somewhat empathetic to the issues that we were raising. I don't, in our conversation, I would say he was pretty forthright about where it stood and what some of the issues were internally in navigating this. But we were very direct, as friends should be. That there is broad opposition to this, and that they should really rethink this. And that us in the United States Congress are opposed to it, and that we don't think this would be helpful, not just in obviously dealing with the inquiries, but in reality in dealing with getting a functioning government back in Northern Ireland and dealing with the important work that all of us collectively have to do as allies, and that it would certainly burn some bridges here. So I think the question really becomes what steps can be taken next, and how we as a United States government can continue to play a role. I last year called for President Biden to appoint a special envoy to Northern Ireland. I thought that was critically important. And I think, Joe Kennedy III was certainly a good choice and someone who can help facilitate. I think we need to continue the dialogue on this particular issue. But I think obviously legal avenues need to be on the table.
Congressman, you told the Irish Echo that you want to play a role similar to Peter King. Congressman King is a great friend of mine. In fact, we honored him in the Bronx last November, and actually played a tremendous role in generating bipartisan support on Irish issues when he was in Congress. And you're actually represent an area in which that role before Peter King arrived as a congressman was played very much by Ben Gilman, who was a co-chair with Mario Biaggi. The ad hoc committee on Irish affairs during difficult times in Ireland would always raise Irish issues regardless of any kind of criticism or political pride. How do you see that proceeding to getting bipartisan support on Irish issues?
So I think, especially as a New Yorker, my great grandparents came from Ireland and emigrated here, came through Ellis Island. New York obviously has always played a special role in dealing with Irish issues. We have large communities in Pearl River, in Yonkers, in Woodlawn, in the Bronx. So this is something that obviously is very important to me and my colleagues. I think Pete King, in so many ways, I always called him New York's third senator. Because obviously he represented his congressional district, but the truth is he represented New York, and he fought for New York on issues from, Irish issues to 9/11 and so on. And so, with his retirement, I think it's important to have a voice coming out of New York who is focused on these issues. And certainly, you alluded to Ben Gilman. He was my predecessor from 20 years ago in a good chunk of the district I currently represent, and served as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee. And I am now serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, and it's certainly a great honor. I'm on the Europe subcommittee. I'm also on the Helsinki Commission. So to be able to have a voice and play a role in many of these issues is something that I take seriously and want to play a big part in as we move forward. I'm only 9 months into my first term, but I think it's important to dive right in, and that's what we've tried to do, and really make sure that the United States is having a voice on these critical issues.
Congressman, we want to thank you for coming on today. I know you have a very busy schedule. I promised to have you off by 11:15. I'm only going to be 1 minute late. And thank you for the statement that you made attacking the legacy bill, for the actions that you've taken previously, and for your continuing support on Irish issues in the Congress, continuing bipartisanship issues in the Congress on Irish issues to raise them with Democrats, give a voice to these issues. Thank you very much, Congressman.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, and look forward to continuing to work with all of you.
Okay, we're next going to go to Ireland to a former Taoiseach, Bertie Ahern. Bertie Ahern, former Taoiseach, was one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement. We are celebrating, in fact, 25th anniversary earlier this year of the Good Friday Agreement. And I note that at the beginning of that agreement, right at the beginning, it says we must never forget those who have died and their families. And the best way to honor them is with a fresh start and by doing things, dedicating ourselves to achieving human rights and to protection and vindication of their human rights. I'm not sure. Danny told me I have to address you as former Taoiseach. Is that correct?
Bertie will do fine. Bertie will do fine.
There you are. All right. You were one of the architects of the Good Friday Agreement. Obviously, that's right in the beginning of the agreement, just the feeling that we have to remember, always remember those who had died, always remember their families, vindicate the human rights. Here is an agreement which is going to be argued breaks those human rights, breaks all of those commitments that you and others who signed the Good Friday Agreement arrived at. How do you see the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill?
Thanks very much, Martin, and it's good to join with you and Danny and everybody else and listen to the congressman. I just be quite pointed just to do two things if I can, Martin. One is to give you my just views, and I think the view of everybody here on the bill. And then I just want to say a few words about all the efforts that we've played to try to deal with that very issue that you mentioned at the very front of the agreement. But I think it's good to say to this meeting that, you know, in our view, the introduction of the Northern Ireland Troubles Legacy and Reconciliation Bill in May 2022, it represents a fundamental break by the British government with the Stormont House Agreement and the inclusive all-party process which delivered it. And it constitutes a unilateral response and a departure from the agreed process, a reconciliation process, without meaningful consultation with those most affected. And they are, as you've said, the victims, the civil society, the Northern Ireland parties, and with no engagement with the Irish government. And that's the very disappointing thing. I think all of us in discussions here, and the congressmen, I had an opportunity to meet them and talking to them when they were here just 2 weeks ago. But there's a number of fundamental concerns with the bill. And I think in short, they are the measures proposed contravene the European Convention of Human Rights and serious concerns about the independence of the proposed independent commission for reconciliation and for information recovery. And the incorporation of the European Court of Human Rights in Northern Ireland law was a specific requirement, as you'd remember, Martin, of the Good Friday Agreement. And secondly, the guillotine of all legacy inquests, police investigations, ombudsman investigations, civil actions, closing down the current mechanisms for families to get truth and justice. And I suppose thirdly, the lack of provision for cross-border cooperation on legacy cases, which was a specific feature of the Stormont House Agreement. And last point I'd make is that the UK unilaterally move away from the agreed way of doing things, which we had set out in the Stormont House Agreement. So they're the main concerns. I think there's a near universal opposition to this bill, as has been said by Danny, on the island of Ireland and everywhere else. It's the only issue in which all 5 political parties in Northern Ireland are united. Survivors, victims, families, victims groups, the churches, civil society, the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission have all expressed their strong opposition to the bill. In particular, and not only, but in particular, the proposed immunity from prosecution has profoundly upset families, and they feel the legislation is more focused on perpetrators than on victims. So that's a list of very serious concerns. And I think international observers expressed similar concerns as the bill progressed through the Parliament. The Council of European Commissioner of Human Rights, the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers, members of Congress, and we've heard from the congressman, all reiterated their strong concerns about the bill's compliance with international human rights legislation. And interestingly, Westminster's own Joint Committee on Human Rights has expressed doubts about the bill's compatibility with the UK's international obligations, and the Labour Party, importantly, is committed to repealing the bill if they win next year's general election. So the government, Danny, have consistently urged the United Kingdom government to pause progress of the bill, to return to a collective approach based on the legitimate needs of victims of human rights obligations and broader societal aims of reconciliation and integration and cohesion. And the Tánaiste Micheál Martin and the Taoiseach in the last few days have said that they're awaiting the legal advice in relation to the possible initiation of interstate case against the UK government. And when that advice is received, I think at the end of the month, the government will consider the subsequent action. And if I can just finish that, Danny, by saying, for those that mightn't follow this as closely as you and Danny and I and others, but all the way through for 25 years, we have been several attempts that have taken the form since we signed the Good Friday Agreement. There was, of course, cases into human rights by people. There were the three Stevens inquiries. There was the inquiry in Bloody Sunday, the Rosemary Nelson, the Finucane case. There was the historical inquiries team by the PSNI. There was the Eames Bradley effort back 14 years ago in 2009. There was a fresh start in 2015. And then there was the Stormont House agreement some years ago. So after all these efforts, this is where we are now, which is really disappointing and extraordinary. So I think that sets the scene. And I've never seen in all my political involvement something that is so universally opposed that it's been pushed down our necks.
Okay, thank you. We're next going to go to somebody who actually, that was a great introduction to her, because she and her family are one of the families that have been through most of the things that the former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern just outlined. We're going to go to East Tyrone. We're going to go to Shauna O'Donnell Quinn, who is the sister of Dwayne O'Donnell, who was one of the 4 people killed at the Boyle's Bar in Kappa in March of 1991. Shauna, your family has been fighting for justice since March of 1991. Now, right away, right at the time, your family and others thought that not only was your brother a victim of a murder, but was a victim of a murder in which British forces, specifically the Ulster Defence Regiment, a regiment of the British Army, was deeply involved and culpable, and the state was deeply complicit in this. Could you tell us what happened to your brother and why your family immediately came to that conclusion?
So Dwayne, my brother Dwayne O'Donnell, he was 17 years old when he was killed. So he was making his way to Boyle's Bar in Kappa on Sunday, the 3rd of March, 1991, and he was travelling along with John Quinn, Malcolm Nugent, and Malachi Rafferty. So as they approached the car park of the pub, the gunmen opened fire and shot my brother, they shot Malcolm, and they shot John. So once they'd finished firing the shots at the car, they then turned to the pub. So they got to the toilet window, and this is where another person, Tommy Armstrong, was shot. So they shot in through the pub window. Obviously, Tommy had ducked for cover, had went to try and go to the toilet on here, to cover on hearing the gunshots. So basically that night, 4 people from Galway, one of which was my brother, he was 17, lost their lives. So the reality of it is, Martin, a few weeks before the shooting, a British Army patrol went in to Boyle's Bar in Kappa, and they drew a diagram showing the layout of the pub. So we now know that this was a common feature in this sort of attack because it happened in other bars as well. So like a week before these 4 boys lost their lives, for a British Army patrol to come in and draw a diagram of the bar, that caused considerable unease amongst people in this community at that time. So basically, on the day of the actual shooting, there was a football match on a mile down the road from the bar. During the match, the helicopter hovered in the sky for hours that day. There was foot patrols, army foot patrols on the road. There was, in fact, where we live in Galway and Kappa, during the conflict, you never could have traveled a mile without getting stopped at a vehicle checkpoint. This area had some of the highest surveillance levels in the north. But just an hour before the shooting, they all suddenly disappeared. So we were never under any illusion that the UDR was involved in our loved ones' murders, Martin.
All right, now, Shauna, originally there was very little interest, no sympathy whatsoever from the Royal Ulster Constabulary. I think your family, others' families went to Bernadette Devlin McAlliskey, the former MP, and a Father Joe McVeigh to issue statements. When that agreement was signed through Bertie Ahern and the British government and the American government, President Clinton, they promised a new start. They talked about victims, your family and others. When they announced that there would be a new beginning, you engaged with the historical inquiries team, which Bertie Ahern has mentioned. You engaged with the new policing boards, and what you had to wait more years for justice. Could you tell us frustratingly how long it took before you got anything from them?
So initially, we engaged with the HET for 7 years. So we were meeting the same staff members who were dealing with our case. So it was probably for about 3-4 years where we were meeting the two same team, the two same people that were dealing with our case. So we thought that we were almost there. And we actually thought at the final meeting that we were going to get a copy of the report. So because we had engaged with them for those number of years, so anyway, we went to what we believed was going to be our final meeting with the HET. So when we got through the doors, it was 2 new people. And we were like, what's this about? So what happened was they introduced themselves as members from the white team. Okay, they had told us that because there was evidence of thematic collusion in the report, that they were now dealing with it. Again, we were like, it's it was so disheartening. It was extremely disheartening, all the years that we have spent, and it's not, it's very it is an emotional time whenever you are going through it all. And then we had to start from scratch. We asked, well, where is the report? They says you don't get a copy of the report because there's evidence of thematic collusion. So our family could have walked away and they could have said, listen, we're not going through this all again. But Martin, we decided, no, we will go through this all again. So we spent another 3 or 4 years going through the same information with these two, with the white team. So then we had to go to court and to get a copy of the report, and eventually we got it in February 2020. It was withheld from us for years and years. And we received, so after we received the report, it claimed that UDR men were responsible for the murders of my brother, Tommy, Malcolm, and John. And the report also stated that these same members were responsible for other murders as well.
If I could interrupt you there.
Yeah.
There were actually 12 murders at least that those same people were responsible, that were connected to the weapons. And in addition to that, I know your family and other families went to the police ombudsman, and there is an Operation Ashton, which you were promised by the former ombudsman, Michael Maguire. It hasn't begun yet. That's supposed to include 60 murders in that area in which collusion is suspected. Now, last month, a new inquest was ordered for you and 4 other victims by the Attorney General, Brenda King. And now, just the way with this new law, it looks like it'll be impossible that will be taken away from you. Because it would have to finish by May of next year in order to conclude. And what's happened is that just discovery papers are not released. They're just continually delayed until the inquest can come. How do you feel about this new law, which after you've fought for so long, you've gone through everything, every time the British said, here's something else to try, you'll get the truth. You finally get an inquest, you finally get an ombudsman investigation promise, and now they're just going to take it away with the other hand.
Martin, it's so disheartening. It's unbelievably disheartening. We have been fighting for 32 years. My brother was 17 years old. And like, you know, the past can never be the past until like we know the truth, until we know the full facts about what happened to our loved ones. And we all deserve recognition that these horrible acts were perpetrated upon us and they never should have happened. You know, these UDR soldiers were operating by day as soldiers, stopping and harassing us on the road. But now we know that they were the ones that were doing the murders at nighttime. You know, we as a family and all families out there, you know, we have the right to truth and justice. And like, I do believe that any denial of the truth is just another act of vengeance on us. You know, it's constant, you know, there's always blockages along the way, you know, and I will say, like, it's 32 years. We will continue to try and fight for some truth, you know, and it's just horrendous that this bill can be even, you know, it's just horrendous. And it's awful.
We're next going to go to Kevin Winters. He's one of the civil rights lawyers who has fought these cases. Kevin, I noticed today, if I read the Irish news, there's been a number of legal challenges already made against the bill. Could you tell us, somebody who's worked in that, you've worked in terms of the European court action, some of the other cases which led to the 4 mechanisms that were should have been enacted as part of the Storm and House agreement. Could you tell us your reaction legally about this bill, what you think is going on, what the next step is going to be for you and other solicitors in the north of Ireland?
First of all, Martin, thanks very much for the invite, and I thank the Ancient Order for extending invite to me to participate in this very, very timely debate on the toxic piece of legislation that's coming down the tracks, that is the legacy bill. I understand at this stage that it's probably a number of weeks away. It awaits royal assent, a sign off by King Charles. So it's coming down the tracks and it's going to be with us. It really sets justice back into the dark ages. It is a completely retrograde step backwards. I mean, even looking at the title of the supposed way forward, the Independent Commission for Reconciliation and Information Recovery, it is not independent by any means, because quite simply, and as the former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern has quite aptly pointed out, there's a major problem. There's a dysfunctionality with it, because there's a veto. The British government, the British have a veto over the type of material that will be available to families. And if the starting point is that veto, well then it's completely on the back foot from the word go. Secondly, the word reconciliation. This is not going to lead to any reconciliation whatsoever, because families at this stage, right across the board, universally, as we've heard here today, and for so many months in the lead up to this, there will be zero reconciliation with this process. Information recovery, that's not going to happen for the reasons I've just outlined. The second reason there is a serious dysfunctionality about the ICRIR is quite simply, is that it's too little too late. And what it is the latest outworkings of keeping families dangling at the end of a political process. And again, as Bertie has highlighted, we had a series of false dawns. We had Haas Sullivan, goes right back to Eames Bradley. We had Stormont House Agreement. Stormont House Agreement was there. It was an available, viable process for us to go forward. It did have its problems. There was a potential veto by the Secretary of State, but there's a fundamental and crucial difference between what was proposed with the Historical Investigations Unit under Stormont House Agreement and what we have now. Quite simply, back in the day, up until this point, we had access to the courts. But with this proposal, access to the courts is completely shut down. The courts are shut. Families, and we've just heard Shauna, again, very emotionally and very, very clearly articulate the very difficult, trenchant journey that her and her family have been on. And that echoes literally hundreds of other families right across the board. But at least they had the opportunity to engage in the various agencies set up to deal with the Article 2 information process and the courts. But crucially, courts are being shut down as a precondition for the implementation of this ICRIR, this toxic ICRIR process, was a shutdown on the courts. And that, for me, as a human rights lawyer, is just about the most egregious, worst human rights abuse that you could get. And this is coming from a so-called modern Western democracy. It sets justice back into the dark ages, and it has to be opposed at every step of the way. And I do detect over the last number of months a real hardening of attitudes, and families with support of NGOs, lawyers, and an international community are galvanizing to try and oppose this. And we do have a raft of legal processes which can be engaged to contest this toxic piece of legislation. And just very, very briefly, we have, as a prelude to anything that's happening in the courts, and you quite rightly cited legal challenges that are going in right now, and I'll come back to that in a second. We have been lobbying the Irish government, and we did so from November last year. We wrote formally and set out the legal basis upon which the Irish government could take an interstate challenge. And it's my understanding from checking it again, that interstate challenge can happen right now. It does not even have to wait until the law is passed officially to take legal effect. There's nothing to stop right now. And I do note that it was commented on last week that the government, in fact, is taking legal advice. So I would take this opportunity today to urge all in that position of influence with the Irish authorities, with the Irish government, to upgrade and escalate that legal process. Because after next week, we will certainly be urging the Irish authorities to move on that and to expedite access to that legal advice. We say it has to be taken. It's a case for so many political, legal, and other reasons needs to be taken.
Kevin, we're going to go to the Consul General for just 1 second for legal advice or for the position of the Irish government. Just want to ask you, how long would it take if families like Shauna have to go through the courts in the north of Ireland, High Court, Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, how long they would be dragged through before they'd ever start a European court action? How long do you think that would take?
We have filed just on Friday and intend to do so again on Monday, a series of judicial review applications in the High Court. Other colleagues in the profession have done so as well on Thursday and Friday of last week. And in the next couple of days, there are more challenges going in. Those will be judicial review challenges based on Article 2 breaches. And those applications, I understand, will be in the High Court list as early as next Friday. This Friday coming will be the first indication about the status of these legal challenges. A roadmap is not likely to be put in place then, but you're talking at least 6 months to 9 months for that legal challenge to follow through. You then have the Court of Appeal and potentially the whole way to the Supreme Court. So you're talking at least 2 to 3 years before you get to a point, if necessary, you go into the European Court of Human Rights.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. We're next going to go. There's been a lot of talk about the position of the Irish government, particularly in terms of going to Europe and representing Irish citizens like Shauna Quinn. We now have a representative of the Irish government, joined by New York Consul General Helena Nolan. Welcome you here. The Irish government, of course, negotiated the Stormont House Agreement in December of 2014. It was a party to that agreement. It had mechanisms that were there that people welcomed, that said we're capable of providing for human rights. What's your position, the Irish government's position today, as you see this new bill going through?
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Danny, and everybody involved. Thanks for the invitation to join you, and as has been said, such a distinguished group of speakers, including our former Taoiseach. Congratulations on your Sean McBride Award. We're looking forward to seeing you in Youngstown. But I just want to renew my thanks to the AOH for organising this timely webinar. I know it's one of a series you continue to organise, and we do appreciate your work on bringing attention and awareness and your influence to the highest levels on this absolutely critical and important issue. And I want to join with that, my thanks to the Ladies AOH for all the work that they do with victims groups and families, which is so important. And can I pay tribute to Shayna for her testimony and to all of the victims groups and survivors and family members who continue to speak out on this issue and share your concerns. We hear you, we thank you for your courage and your determination. I know it cannot be easy to reiterate these narratives. It's very brave of you to do so. It really struck me what Shayna said there, the past can never be the past until we know the truth. I think that's a very powerful and moving message. I know that Congressman had to leave, but can I also record my thanks to him for his strong intervention and his consistent support. It was good to see him in Dublin. As he said, he's been a great friend to Ireland for many years. We very much appreciate the bipartisan support of successive US administrations for the cause of peace in Northern Ireland, for the Good Friday Agreement, and now on this deeply significant legacy issue. I'll just briefly pick up on a point the Congressman made before I come to your question, Martin. I thought it was very important what he said about the lack of a functioning executive and politics in Northern Ireland currently. If I could quote our own Taoiseach, he has made clear that he worries that the enactment of this bill, which is opposed by all the parties in the North and by victims and survivors of the Troubles across communities, is really setting back that essential work of reconciliation. And that while we do have peace, thankfully, Northern Ireland is not reconciled. And so that has an impact on today's politics. And competing narratives on the past can crowd out constructive work that needs to be done on day-to-day issues which will change lives for the better. So I very much want to endorse that overarching point that the Congressman made so strongly. But coming back to the bill itself, Martin, I have a long list of concerns here that I could go through, but I think I'll just go straight to speaking quite frankly with you, and to say that, as you know, our concerns are about both process and substance. So the substance has been referred to a lot by colleagues here. If I could focus in on process, yes, this bill was drafted without input from the Irish government, the Northern Ireland parties, or those most affected, the victims on all sides. Worse, as has been said, it was a unilateral British decision to walk away from what was already agreed in the Stormont House Agreement. And that included walking away from an international agreement which had been signed. In January, you'll recall January 2020, both governments had recommitted to the Stormont House Agreement, and the United Kingdom government had committed to introducing legislation to give effect to it within 100 days. But instead, what they introduced during that period was the idea of a blanket amnesty, and this bill evolved from that idea. I think you've acknowledged that the Irish government has opposed this bill from the start. Taoiseach, Taoiseach, ministers have been very strong. On countless occasions, our ministers and our officials have expressly asked the UK to pause progress of the bill, to return to the table with us and the parties and start taking the Stormont House Agreement again as our starting point. That opposition continues. I can share with you that just yesterday, officials from the Department of Foreign Affairs were in Strasbourg to brief member states of the Council of Europe, making clear that we remain opposed to the bill and seeking their support. I think you'll probably want to ask me about the interstate case, so we can come back to that if you like. But what I want to focus on as well is families. And, you know, we've heard from Shayna, we know that families bereaved during the Troubles continue to feel the pain of loss and to articulate their desire for truth, accountability, and justice. Existing mechanisms, however imperfect, are delivering important outcomes for families. In its legacy bill, the UK government intends to permanently close off access to those mechanisms: inquests, police ombudsman investigations, civil cases, police investigations, which have been working for families and importantly demonstrate a vindication of the state's obligations under the European Convention on Human Rights to investigate killings effectively. And again, as has been said by others, a huge degree of international concern raised about this by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Council of Europe, Westminster's Joint Committee on Human Rights. They've all expressed serious doubts about the compliance of the legislation with international human rights norms. And as you've said, and as others have reiterated, we had a much better path. This has been an important issue for us for many years, and as far back as 2014, we had the Stormont House Agreement, which the Northern Ireland parties and the two governments had decided on mechanisms that would better assist families to pursue justice. And as I've said, that was endorsed again under the New Decade, New Approach deal. So I think we had all agreed that new processes should be victim-centred, and we had agreed on architecture designed to promote reconciliation and create a context in which the UK and Irish governments would consider statements of acknowledgement and, importantly, expect others to do the same. If I could quote the Taoiseach again, he is deeply concerned that the unilateral approach the UK government is pursuing will be very damaging. And he has said, in the Stormont House Agreement, mechanisms for cross-border cooperation were built in because the legacy bill is designed without regard for this cross-border dimension. There may be profound impediments to the effective investigation of murders in Ireland perpetrated by those who live north of the border and vice versa. And again, to quote the Taoiseach, he has said, this is unnecessary and worse, is simply cruel, leaving questions and suspicions hanging and preventing lasting reconciliation. I could go on, Martin, but I'm sure you want to ask me another question. So
well, the main question's coming up, but one of the concerns that people have is that because the existing mechanisms, even without Stormont House, were starting to work. They worked for the Ballymurphy families. They worked an ombudsman report in which collusion was shown in a number of different areas. That's why the British government is moving to take away access to those things which have worked, in addition to not providing something that will work. But the main point, as Kevin outlined, Shauna was talking about, inquests have been taken away or will be taken away. The ombudsman report, the things that have worked are being taken away, access to the courts. Families are now, who have been fighting for justice for 30 years, are now saying, are we going to have to go through more years of courts with people like Kevin Winters, or will the Irish government stand up for us, stand up for our human rights by taking the case directly to Europe on our behalf? And I just would like to ask you what the present posture is on that decision.
Sure, thank you, Martin. Well, just to confirm again, because I know you were asking me earlier about what role is envisaged under this new legislation for the Irish government, and I just want to be clear that no role is envisaged for the Irish government. It was drafted completely without reference to us, and that goes for appointments to senior roles, and also, as we've said, for that cross-border cooperation issue, which former Taoiseach Ahern also mentioned, and that's not considered in any form in the bill. So they're in addition to the concerns that we have with it. On that very important question of the interstate case, I think you've seen publicly the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach have been quite open about where things stand. The Taoiseach has sought legal advice, and that is awaited. I think the last time he spoke about it, he said he expected it in the coming weeks. That advice couldn't be finalised until the bill was finalised. The bill has completed its passage in Westminster and is going, as has been said, for royal assent. Various voices, numerous voices have called for us to take such a case, we know, including the Northern Ireland Victims Commissioner and the Committee on the Administration of Justice, as has been said. We're aware that taking such a case would be a big step. We've only done it once before in the 1970s, but I can confirm it is a live issue and it is under very active consideration. As you know, Taoiseach and Taoiseach will be here next week for meetings at the UN. I don't know if you can see, I have the United Nations behind me there. But while they're here, as former Taoiseach Ahern will recall, they will take every opportunity also to engage with the Irish community, our diaspora, with Irish America. Martin, you'll have, I think, an opportunity yourself to engage. So they may have updates for us at that point, but they will certainly have an opportunity to hear your concerns. I will be seeing the Taoiseach over the weekend, and I will certainly share what I've heard at this meeting with him.
All right. We appreciate that very much. We're looking forward to those meetings. I know you have hosted a number of events, and Kieran Madden, your predecessor, had hosted a number of events. Will he have the opportunity to address this directly with Mihal Martin or Simon Cavini, and we appreciate that and looking forward to asking a question next week. All right, I'm going to go back to Danny. Danny, do you want to go for final comments?
Yes, I do. We're going to have everyone with an opportunity here for a few final comments. But what we're going to do, we're going to go a little long here. And I know Bertie has another event, so I'm going to invite him for his final comments. We're going to go to Sean Pender, our vice president, and then we'll go right through the other three panelists for final comments. Great job. This was an emotional and a meaningful hour. And it's going to help us and help our friends in the North Island. But first, I want to go to Bertie Ahern. Bertie, thank you for your time today, giving us a full hour. We greatly appreciate it. I know you had a busy schedule today, but for your closing comments today.
Thanks very much, Danny. And I think we've heard a very good outline of where the government is here, and thank you for that. And just what's going to happen. I think the unfortunate thing about this is, there's not many things, I think we all know, that in Northern Ireland that we can get agreement on. We battle year in, year out to get an agreed position on things. I thought back it's 8 years ago now, in October of 2015, when the two governments concluded what was an international agreement, the ICIR, which was pending the enactment at that time of the legislation that Charlie Flanagan had been working on, the Stormont House implementation bill by the British government. And that bill has never been brought to Westminster. Some people asked me the other night, I was in a university debate, and people said, well, what happened to that? But it was never brought to Westminster, notwithstanding a commitment has been said that the Secretary of State in January 2020, in the New Decade, New Approach, that they would introduce that legislation within the 100 days, as has been said. And I think that the government at that stage, the UK government at that stage, argued that the Stormont House mechanism failed to attract political support. Now, that just wasn't true. The bill was that as it was negotiated was never placed before Westminster, and it means that the only measure to attract wide political support in Northern Ireland, negotiated in good faith with them and with the two governments, has never been given a chance. And I think that's the crying shame in all of this. There was an alternative. There was an alternative bill, agreement, plan, worked hard on by our consuls and ambassadors and people, and so it was a very clear position. And the responsibility of legislation for legacy issues was placed at that stage with the UK government rather than on the Northern Ireland executive, partly at that stage in recognition of the ongoing sensitivities of those issues within the North. And by creating a separate architecture to deal with the legacy issues, we thought we'd have real progress. And Sean has outlined that. I need to say no more, just to thank Sean for outlining that. So I think, Danny, we just have to see where this goes. We'll see what the legal opinion is, but I've never seen anything in a long, long time that has been so unitedly disagreed with on the British government. But all indications to date have been that they're fairly well determined to push on, and we just have to see where that brings us. But I don't think we'll have to wait too long. I think the royal assent will happen fairly soon. The legal advice will happen soon, and no doubt I'll be seeing you fairly soon, Danny. So we'll see where we're going over the next few weeks.
Well, and listening to you today, Bertie, I got to say, when Sean Pender first brought you up as a candidate for the Sean McBride Humanitarian Award, I know why you were the best candidate, especially in the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. We're so looking forward to having you in Youngstown, Ohio, and in the United States with members of the AOH. And we will be showing that evening around the country. We do have members in all 50 states. There's a lot of them watching today, but thank you for your time. And we're going to move to Sean Pender, our National Vice President.
Thank you, Danny, Martin, and to all who joined us today as we continue our very important work to address legacy in the North and to rally against this shameful bill. I think this was really a story of contrast. I think Kevin and others spoke about this basically just provides the British with a way to continue doing the shell game what they've had. They continually point to things like, oh well, we're considering Ames Bradley, we're considering Haas O'Sullivan, we're signed up for the Stormont Agreement. See, this is how we're addressing it. And then, like someone said, that when some of these things were not agreed to, but other things like the Ballymurphy inquiry and other inquiries starting to work, and we're getting some justice, then they make a unilateral decision to pull the rug out from everybody. But it shouldn't be, unfortunately, surprising, because that's the way they've addressed their participation in the North during and after the Troubles. But I think what really struck me is Shauna in his what we've heard from so many victims, the patience that they exhibited by looking for justice, to go to and put your trust into a series of people, and then to go back and to have to tell your story again, just to look for the truth. But Shauna, I think you said something that I won't forget, that denial of truth is an act of vengeance. It's absolutely an act of vengeance. And I can assure you, we will continue to fight against that act of vengeance, and share today's meeting with members of the Senate Foreign Relations, other members of Congress, with our State Department, to show why it's so important to come against this. But I'd also like to say we should contrast the English government's position with that of the Irish government. They have shown total resolve in listening to the victims. They have been professional, they have been compassionate, and they have been unwavering in their support. And I think that's a credit to the Irish government. And while we're all waiting for those magic words to say, yes, they will take a case, I think they're doing it in a very, very professional way. And indeed, they're being the voice for justice in there. So our fight is not over. We still have a ways to go, but despite what they might do, and despite what anyone might enact by a signature of a member of a royal family, our work is not over, and we'll continue to fight this till it's repealed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. And for closing comments, Shauna, you're muted. You're
Sorry. Firstly, I just want to say I really appreciate that the AOH are highlighting this. So thank you, and thank you for inviting me on to speak. I just have one word. I've just got one sentence to say to you: please, please. You can see the hurt, and it's 32 years on. So please, please, if they're do whatever you possibly can to try and help the victims, because this is unacceptable, and it's unacceptable. Thank you.
Thank you. And we can promise you we will continue the fight. Kevin?
Yeah, just very briefly, can I first of all say thank you to Helena for those very, very encouraging, positive remarks about the potential for an Irish challenge by way of interstate against the British government over this piece of legislation. Secondly, could I use this platform just to dispel again the myth that the legal processes before the courts here were not working for families. If there's any criticism about the processes aren't not working, that all rests at the door of the British government and the various agencies, because of the systemic starving of funds and resources to the Ombudsman's office, to the inquest, coroner's court system, to various other investigations. And it's against that very difficult resource deprived background, it's actually commendable that lawyers, supporters, families, NGOs have all collectively been able to engage with the courts in a very meaningful way. And it's the threat of that positive outworking with the court system that is directly or indirectly the reason we have a legacy bill. Had there been no legal agitation of any meaningful nature over the last number of years, we may well not have had a legacy bill. The legacy bill is, in my view, and it's a personal view, is a complete knee-jerk reaction to the outworkings of a justice process that has been made to work over the years. Finally, a word to the families. We can't do our job without the families' support. And I'm amazed, and we've heard it here again today from Shauna, I'm amazed about the tolerance and the time that families have invested in all of this. I mean, it's truly remarkable. And without their continued support, ourselves and NGOs wouldn't be able to do our job.
Thank you, Kevin. We appreciate your time today. Helena?
Thank you very much, Danny. I'd just like to thank everyone again for your advocacy and for your important insights today. I think one thing we've all concluded is how important it is that we keep victims at the centre of all of this. I want to thank Shauna again for her testimony. There was mention of my predecessor in this role, Kieran Madden, who many of you will know is now leading on these issues with an excellent team back in headquarters. So you can be assured that Kieran is dedicated to these issues. And thank you, Sean, for those kind words about the role of the Irish government. I do think Taoiseach and Taoiseach have been very, very clear on this. And just to recall again that unprecedented domestic opposition, but also the extraordinary united international opposition, including from the UN, which, as I say, is always here over my shoulders. There was a reference to good faith. And as our former Taoiseach Bertie Ahern will know, that's good faith is essential for negotiations and for progress. Let's hope we can get back to that again. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. And I'll just echo the words. The Irish government has been incredible working with the victims, working with all the issues in the North Ireland, working with the Irish American advocates, and we can't thank them enough. We've had such great support from them for such a long time, and it wasn't always that way. And it's a new generation. It's a new time. Martin, any closing comments before we close the webinar?
Headline on the Irish Echo was "America Says No." I've never seen in all the years I've worked, Irish America so united on an issue as we are behind people like Shauna, behind Kevin, behind the Irish government position on this issue. And I want to thank the Ladies AOH Unity Conference, all of the other organizations, ad hoc committee, all of the other organizations who join with us, who work with us on this issue. And I especially want to thank Sean. I couldn't help but notice when they had the list of people who were killed with those guns, which killed a brother, which the UDR was involved. A very close friend of mine, an American citizen, lived in the Bronx for many years before going home. Liam Ryan was on that list. I know that all of the victims, they've been fighting for years. They have to go through, relive this, go through all the pain every time they have to go to court, every time they get another delay, every time they get frustrated with some new initiative by the British government. They say they want to produce better outcomes. What they mean is they're afraid of the verdicts of their own inquest courts, of their own ombudsman, of their own devices, much less a historical investigations unit. We have to stay behind them. We have to support them. We're united today. Let's keep united. Let's keep united behind these families until they get justice.
Thank you, Martin. And in closing, I just want to say that the British government has forgotten that when Churchill coined the term special relationship, he specifically mentioned that it was built on principles such as trial by jury. And it is our focus from this point forward to end the delusion of that special relationship and continue to build the Irish special relationship that began long before the United States had their independence. And so we've always been able to count on the Irish. We know we can count on you today. And with that, we traditionally close our webinars with a video as everyone's getting off. And we have a very special video coming on here. Go ahead, Chris, it's all yours. And thank you all for joining us. God bless you. And remember our friends in the North Ireland and Ireland as you move forward this weekend. Go ahead, Chris.
As down the glen one Easter morn to a city fair rode I. There aren't lines of mud flag of war. For 'twas better to die 'neath an Irish sky than at Suvla or Sudelbar. And from the plains of royal meads strong men came hurrying through, while Britannia's Huns with their long-range guns sailed in through the foggy dew. Our bravest fell, and the Requiem bell rang mournfully and clear. For those who died at Eastertide in the springing of the year, how the world did gaze with deep amaze at those fearless men, but few, who bore the fight that freedom's light might shine through the foggy dew. And back through the glen I rode again, and my heart with grief was sore. For I parted then with valiant men whom I never shall see more. But to and fro in my dreams I go, and I kneel and pray for you. For slavery fled, all glorious dead, when you fell in the foggy